Emma worked tirelessly, not for herself, but for the little lives that depended on her. The weight of her struggles never broke her spirit, and even in the face of hardship, kindness never left her heart. But fate was watching, and soon, a stranger would step into her life, turning her world in a direction she never saw coming. The restaurant was alive with movement and chatter, the air thick with the scent of freshly cooked meals. Laughter and conversation blended with the clatter of dishes as customers enjoyed their food. Among the swift-moving waitstaff was Emma, a young pregnant waitress, balancing a tray with practiced ease. Her smile never faltered, though exhaustion tugged at her body. The long shifts drained her, but she had no choice. Her family depended on her. Emma had been working endlessly, pouring every ounce of energy into providing for her loved ones. Since her husband's tragic passing, she had been left to fend for herself, her unborn child, and her little son, whom she had entrusted to the care of her mother-in-law. Every extra shift she worked, every tip she earned, it was all for them. She wanted to ensure her son never felt the emptiness of a father's absence, that he had everything he needed to grow up happy and secure. As she moved from table to table, her focus remained on her work, making sure each customer was satisfied. The dull ache in her legs was familiar by now, a discomfort she had long since learned to ignore. Finally, as her shift neared its end, she stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the crisp evening air, seeking a brief respite from the weight of her day. That was when she saw her. A small figure was huddled near the entrance of the restaurant, barely more than a shadow against the dimly lit street. A little girl, no older than 6, sat on the cold pavement, her thin arms wrapped around herself as she shivered. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt, and her hollow eyes darted around, watching the people who passed her by without a second glance. Emma's heart clenched at the sight. The girl looked so fragile, so helpless. She didn't think twice. Turning on her heel, she hurried back inside, reached into her own pocket, and used her hard-earned money to buy a warm meal. With careful hands, she carried the tray outside, kneeling beside the girl and gently placing the plate before her. "Here, sweetheart," Emma said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "Eat as much as you want." The girl hesitated, her wide eyes searching Emma's face as if she couldn't believe the offer was real. But as the aroma of the food reached her, hunger took over. She grabbed the fork and began eating with urgency, as though she hadn't had a proper meal in days. Emma watched her, a gentle smile forming on her lips. It wasn't much, but at least for tonight, this child wouldn't have to go to sleep hungry. Unbeknownst to Emma, a man sitting in the far corner of the restaurant had seen everything. He had been watching quietly, his expression unreadable. He made no move to intervene, no words left his lips, but his gaze lingered. And Emma, unaware that her small act of kindness had not gone unnoticed, simply wiped her hands on her apron and returned to work, never imagining that this single moment was about to change the course of her life forever. The next day, the restaurant was just as lively as ever. Despite the ache in her feet and the growing weight of her belly, Emma moved between tables with her usual dedication. She greeted customers with a warm smile, took orders with precision, and ensured everything was served to perfection. As she placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of a suited man sitting near the window, she heard the familiar chime of the restaurant door. Another customer had entered. Without looking up, she grabbed a menu and approached the new arrival. "Welcome," she said, her voice polite but carrying the unmistakable weariness of a long day. "Would you like to start with something to drink?" It was only when she finally met the customer's gaze that her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The man from the previous night, the one who had been sitting in the corner, watching. He was back. Emma knew nothing about him, only that he was well-dressed and carried himself with an air of quiet authority. But there was something different about the way he looked at her today, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "I'll have the same as yesterday," he said, his voice steady and composed. Emma nodded, quickly jotting down his order. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her mid-step. "You didn't have to do that yesterday," he said, his gaze unwavering. Emma blinked in confusion. "Do what?" He leaned forward slightly. "That little girl outside. You gave her a meal and paid for it yourself." "Why?" For a brief moment, Emma stiffened. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone bring it up. But after a short sigh, she gave a small, tired smile. "Because she was hungry," she said simply. And no one else was going to help her. The man studied her, his eyes searching hers, as if seeing something in her that others overlooked. Then, after a pause, he gestured toward the seat across from him. "Sit," he said. Emma hesitated. Then slowly, she pulled out the chair and sat down. Emma slid into the seat across from him, a hint of hesitation flickering in her tired eyes. "You're pregnant," he pointed out, his voice laced with quiet concern. "And you're still working so hard." She swallowed hard. She never discussed her personal struggles with customers, but something about his genuine curiosity made her open up. "My husband passed away," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have a son, and I need to support him. My mother-in-law takes care of him while I work, but I can't stop. I have a baby on the way, and I need to make sure my kids have a good life." For the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Speaking her hardships out loud made them feel heavier, but she refused to break under the weight of them. The man across from her didn't speak immediately. He simply observed her, his expression unreadable, as if he were absorbing every word. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. "You're a strong woman," he finally said. "And hard-working." Emma gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her weary eyes. "I don't have a choice." Something shifted in his gaze, something she couldn't quite place. He had come here today for a reason, and now he was certain of it. What Emma didn't know was that this conversation would be the beginning of something that would change her life forever. The next morning, the restaurant was alive with its usual rush. The scent of fresh coffee and breakfast filled the air as customers chatted over their meals. Emma moved swiftly between tables, ensuring that every order was taken with care, every plate delivered with a smile. She had barely gotten a moment to breathe when the familiar chime of the restaurant door rang again. She turned out of habit, ready to greet the new arrival, but the sight of the man standing in the doorway made her hands momentarily freeze. It was him. The well-dressed, quiet observer. The man who had studied her with those knowing eyes the night before. Emma quickly regained her composure, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached him with her usual polite smile. "Good morning," she greeted. "Your usual coffee?" The man gave a small nod but didn't reach for a menu. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, as if trying to see past the surface. Emma hesitated for a moment before turning to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Sit with me for a moment." She blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, but I'm working." "I won't take much of your time," he assured her. "Please, just a few minutes." There was something in his tone, something firm yet gentle, that made her pause. She glanced toward the counter, where her manager was busy with another order, then exhaled softly. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The man leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "I never introduced myself," he said. "My name is Nathan Carter." Emma tilted her head slightly. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Carter," she replied, still unsure where this conversation was going. Nathan's gaze softened. "I want to ask you something, Emma. How long have you been working here?" She hesitated. "Almost 3 years. And you plan to continue working through your pregnancy?" A small, weary chuckle escaped her lips. "I don't really have a choice," she admitted. "I need to provide for my son and my baby on the way. This job is all I have right now." Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable. "You're a remarkable woman," he said at last. "Not everyone would go to such lengths to help a stranger, like you did with that little girl the other night." Emma shifted uncomfortably, not used to receiving compliments. "It was nothing," she said quickly. She was hungry. "I just did what anyone would do." Nathan leaned back slightly, his sharp gaze never leaving hers. "No," he said firmly. "Not just anyone would do that. Most people would look away and pretend they didn't see it." Emma swallowed hard but said nothing. Just then, the door opened again, and a sharply dressed man entered the restaurant. He moved with purpose, heading straight for Nathan's table. Leaning down, he whispered something in his ear. Nathan gave a small nod before turning his attention back to Emma. She frowned, confused. "Who is he?" Nathan smiled slightly. "My assistant." Emma's brows furrowed. "Assistant." Nathan reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded document, and slid it across the table toward her. Curious, she picked it up, unfolding the paper with careful fingers. The moment her eyes landed on the words written across the top, her breath hitched. "Official purchase agreement." She scanned further, her vision blurring as her heart pounded in her chest. This restaurant now belongs to Emma Hudson. Her hands trembled as she looked up at Nathan, her eyes wide with shock. What is this?" she stammered. Nathan stood, buttoning his coat as if he had just completed a simple errand. "I bought this restaurant," he said casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Emma shook her head in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" Nathan's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Because people like you deserve a chance to succeed. You work hard, you're kind, and you never give up. This place should belong to someone who truly cares about it and the people in it." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she clutched the document tightly. Her